Here on the ground, change happens fast. Problems feel frequent and urgent. It's loud and anxiety runs high. From a satellite view, the Earth looks the same as it did thousands of years ago. We've been here before. Let's learn from our past and shoot for a better future.
Todd Mikkelson here with a satellite view. We're just a couple days out from a few days out from the 2022 midterm elections. I'm speaking to you on Friday, November 4th in the space and time continuum. And last week, about a week ago, I did a show called 1 Week Out. Today's show will probably be called something like a few days out or something. I again spoke to my friend who lives in Boston just yesterday, and he is worried. But he's hearing what the mainstream media is saying. And the mainstream media is still trying to keep everyone really tense, really fired up, and really feeling like this is a horse race that's going to go right down neck and neck to the very end of the finish line. I think all of America is getting sick of that. So what I do is I report to my friend who lives in Boston, who's very worried. I've been talking to him periodically and updating him on information that is very hopeful. And that's what I want to do today. Now, also, what I told him was, as hopeful as I am for all of this, I'm also realizing that the Republicans are basically setting everything up so that when they get their asses handed to them, they can call fraud on everything. I mean, there are some scary things going on. So that's the negative part. That's the bummer part. That's the part that I'm worried about, as optimistic as I am about everything. Of course, you know, just like when we elected Barack Obama, it felt like, oh God, we got the Bush crime family out of Washington, D.C. finally. Now we can all relax. And then, the Republicans started to crawl out from under their racist rock and be mad at the black president. And they started the Tea Party, and then they won Congress. And then Obama couldn't get anything done anymore. You know, we needed to get his back. It doesn't stop when we're successful in an election. We have to keep moving. The next phase is going to have to be kind of fighting against this force that is not unprecedented, which I'm going to go through. This is called a satellite view, and a big part of a satellite view is looking at things in the context of many other things, including and especially the history of things and how we've been here before. All right, let's break into the positive news. Last week, I updated you that Howard Dean, who really knows how to read into what's going on right before an election, he knows how to use the polling and all of those different things. He understands that polling has changed a lot, especially over the last 15 to 20 years out of necessity, and that polls are very difficult to do compared to how they used to be, and that we need to be very careful when we're watching polls. He understands all that, and he understands how polls are mixed with statistics and also how to follow the averages of polling. He also understands that because the averages of polling is what ultimately are the numbers that people should be watching, if you're relying on polls, that is, the Republicans have been doing some bogus polling just to try and change the average into their favor. And the reason they're doing that is to try and scare Democrats into not voting, trying to make it seem hopeless. Like, yeah, Republicans are totally going to win this election. There's no reason, if you're a Democrat, to vote. You're going to lose. Traditionally, you're going to lose. And it's true. Traditionally, in the midterm elections for the last 50 years, or maybe less than that, but for decades now, I should say, the midterms usually go in the opposite direction of whoever is sitting in the White House. That's traditional. Things aren't traditional anymore. You know, things are overwhelmingly different. People are more engaged than they've been in my lifetime. Now, I get back to Howard Dean. Howard Dean knows how this stuff works. His prediction is we keep what we currently have in the House and add maybe 2 seats. And we keep what we currently have in the Senate and we add 2 or 3 seats. That's basically a prediction that he gave a little bit more than a week. I think it was a week ago Thursday. That's very close to what I feel. I'm even more optimistic. I think we're going to pick up more seats than that, but I would go along with his predictions. I'm also going to stick with my Minnesota prediction that I would be very surprised if Scott Jensen, the gubernatorial candidate, gets more than 38% of the vote. I'm going to stick to that. The closer we get to Election Day, the more confident I feel about that. Let's get into some of the statistics. Simon Rosenberg, who was on the Clinton campaign in 1992 and I think in 1996 as well, he worked with, basically, he calls it the Clinton War Room. He's got a lot of good credentials. He really knows how this stuff works. He even says, realize that part of why I remain optimistic about our chances this year is my experience with the 92 Clinton campaign. No one thought we could win. We had lost 5 of the last 6 presidential elections. The GOP apolitical machine was too strong. And you know what happened? We won. So he also says, happy Friday, everyone. What I'm seeing, Democrats continue to overperform in polls and early vote in the Senate battlegrounds. Early vote being even more important than polls, in my opinion. He says the early vote remains very encouraging for Democrats. Marist polls, another problem for red wave narrative. So there's a new Marist poll that is bumming out the Republicans. I saw somebody else say the reason that Republicans are pointing fingers at each other today is because they're getting their internal polling and they're realizing the red wave is not happening. The red tsunami, which actually, water is blue. And I said this on the my last show, water is blue only because it reflects the sky. And the sky is blue because of something having to do with the way different light rays shades the colors of light. I'm not going to go into that. That's science. It's very interesting, though, but I need to get the lingo right. I kind of know, but I can't really explain it right now off the top of my head. But water is blue because it's clear, but it's reflective. So water is blue. So a tsunami is going to be blue. This is going to be a blue tsunami. A red tsunami would be blood. Here is some results. So in 2018, the Democrats at this point had 13,965,000 and some thousand early votes. So basically what we're doing is comparing 2018 to now. And right now, in 2022, we have 16,186,000 as opposed to 2018's 13,965,000. What was supposed to be a tough week for Democrats, what ended up happening instead is a majority of generics have Democrats tied or ahead. Very strong Senate polling among nonpartisan polls. Strong early vote got more Democrats as week went on. Rasmussen has Democrats gaining 2 points. Republicans still defending Iowa, North Carolina, and Ohio. That's a big deal. And they're still dumping BS polls. So a lot of this is likely more optimistic than that for Democrats. This early vote data is a repudiation of red wave narrative. Still reading from Simon Rosenberg's Twitter. The early vote actually got more Democratic this week. 4 states, Arizona, North Carolina, Texas, and Washington, moved 4 to 5 points more in recent days. Movement is towards Democrats. Yeah, the embrace of the red wave was wildly premature. Another day of encouraging early vote data. Democrats lead 50 to 40. That's 2 points better than this point in 2020. We have a 3.4 million national vote lead, and that is right now, actually 8 hours ago. That right now in a midterm election, the Democrats are doing better than they were doing in the 2020 presidential election. And we've got a 3.4 million national lead. Now, at this time in 2018, the Republicans were ahead. I think by some, last I saw him say was 400,000 votes ahead. And now we are 3.4 million ahead. Democrats' net margin over 2020. Okay, this is talking about how many points better than we were doing in 2020 at this point in the early voting. In Michigan, we're doing 21 points better. New Jersey, 17 better. Pennsylvania, 13 better. Wisconsin, 13 better. Iowa, 12 better. Georgia, 12 better. Indiana, 10 better. Ohio, 8 better. Texas, 7 better. Minnesota, 7 better. Arizona and Washington, +4. North Carolina, Nevada, Nebraska, +3. New Mexico, +2. And it's not just the early voting numbers. A new job report came out today. Again, more than what was expected for October. Right now, we can put this together. The first term job creation of Nixon, Reagan, Bush 1, Bush 2, and Trump. So that's 4 years times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 presidents. That's a 20-year period of time. In the 20-year period of time that Republicans were president in their first term, they created 10.55 million jobs. Biden job creation in just 21 months is 10.3 million. So he's almost already created as much as the last 5 Republican presidents put together in total. Again, we go to Simon Rosenberg, another really strong jobs report, 290,000 with revisions. And that the revisions usually makes it higher a few weeks later. But right now, they're saying 290K. Resilience and strength of U.S. economy continues to be remarkable, says Simon Rosenberg. In the 16 years that Clinton and Obama were president, they created 33.8 million jobs. 21 months of Biden, 10.3 million jobs. In the 16 years of both Bushes and Trump, 1.9 million jobs. All right? Both Bushes and Trump, in the whole time they were president, created 1.9 million jobs. Biden already in 21 months has created 10.3. You know, so yeah, if Republicans want to talk about the economy, let's talk about the economy. You wrecked it again. And don't say that COVID was a part of that. It was wrecked thoroughly before COVID. Another thing, last I heard, and it's probably more now, Biden has reduced the deficit by $1.4 trillion. Trump raised it more than $7 trillion. And he was, in 4 years, he raised it more than $7 trillion. Biden has already, in a year and a half, a little more than a year and a half, lowered it $1.4 trillion. Also, Victor Shi, youngest Biden delegate in 2020, co-host of his podcast, iGen Politics. He's a young guy. Strategy director for Voters of Tomorrow, who I've talked about before on the radio at least. He's a Gen Z activist, former White House intern, and Joe Biden 2020 alum. He puts out information and gets a lot of statistics about the young voting. And his newest tweet is huge youth turnout numbers out of Pennsylvania. More than 60,000 young Democrats in Pennsylvania have cast their ballots. This time in 2018, that number was barely over 15,000. That's 4 times more. Young people are fired up and are voting. Don't believe otherwise. And he backs it up with data and charts. This is all numbers. This isn't polling. This isn't speculation. This isn't statistics. This is actual numbers. With the good always has to come the not so good, you know? When we come back in just seconds, we'll talk about that. So yeah, Blue Tsunami. By the way, I'm excited that I am going to be doing election night coverage with Brett Johnson starting at 9 p.m. So we'll be getting certainly Minnesota results by 9 p.m. Likely the first results will be pouring in. So it'll be fun to be on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, on Tuesday night, election night. I'm excited about that. As you know, or maybe you don't, I periodically sit in for the Matt McNeil show on AM 950 whenever he takes vacations, which is a lot, which I'm happy about. I counted, I think I've been on 20 shows, 22-hour show, each show being 2 hours, 20 shows in the year 2022 so far. So I'm excited to be helping them out with their coverage and be a part of the AM 950 family again. So yeah, a blue tsunami. I'm excited to report the victories of my friends that I know personally, Kelly Morrison, Lauren Bresnahan, Caitlin Cahill. I'm excited to be announcing their victories, probably right around 9 o'clock. Also, Dean Phillips, another friend of mine, other friends that, of course, are going to win, Aaron Murphy. It's going to be a blue tsunami, and we're going to win out here in this district, in some parts of it, for the first time in the history of Minnesota, actually in the history of the universe. Those are more of the good things. I said when we come back, we're gonna cover some of the not so good things. Here's something that happened in the 1950s. Again, a satellite view, we like to go back in history and talk about that. You know, we've been here before, so let's learn from our mistakes and try and not make them again. Let's try and make the world a better place instead of keeping to repeat our mistakes. I'm reading American Psychosis, written by David Korn, a brand new book, and it's very interesting. He does what I like to do. He goes back in history and points things out. Well, if you remember Joe McCarthy in the 1950s, it's before my time, so I don't remember it, but if you remember learning about it, Joe McCarthy was, I imagine he probably seems a little bit like Ted Cruz would be now. Except Joe McCarthy was probably even worse. He was a heavy drinker. He was a heavy gambler. And, of course, he was a heavy liar. Now, Ted Cruz is right with him on that. But he was also a smarmy, disheveled-looking, kind of the guy that everybody hates, you know? He makes it just really easy to dislike him. Or maybe Joe McCarthy was more like Lauren Boebert because, you know, dumb as well, but mostly lying. Once you discover that you tell outrageous lies, you get a lot of attention. That's what Joe McCarthy was doing back in the 50s, starting in 1950. So he was running for re-election in 1952, and if you remember, well, again, before all of our times, right? So you don't remember, but the guy running for president was Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was a war hero. And Dwight Eisenhower did not want to have anything to do with Joe McCarthy. Most actual Republicans didn't want to have anything to do with Joe McCarthy. So again, it's very similar to now with like Trump, except Republicans were more brave back then and actually spoke out about it. But in the 1952 election cycle, Eisenhower had to actually campaign in Wisconsin, which was the home state of Joe McCarthy. And they were going to, be on stage together. And Eisenhower didn't want to have anything to do with McCarthy. He said, I'm going to talk about that I disagree with you. And McCarthy said, if you do that, you're going to get booed. They were doing the old whistle call on the train. And which if I were running for president, I would so do that. I'm sure nobody would let me, but that's what they used to do. And this was, this was 1952. Airplane travel was still very rare. So even the president of the United States didn't really fly very much. So they were taking a train through Wisconsin. Eisenhower and some other Wisconsin politicians, including Joe McCarthy. Joe McCarthy was accusing people of being communists. He was saying that there was 205 members of maybe part of the administration or part of government that were known communists. He was saying outrageous things, saying that, very similar to now, though, the elitists are going against America. They're selling us out. They're making us less safe. By design, they're planning on making us less safe. He really went after General George C. Marshall, who, along with Eisenhower, right after World War II, the Marshall Plan you may have heard of. The Marshall Plan was basically to help and rebuild Europe because Europe was decimated by the Nazis. Eisenhower and General George C. Marshall were the guys who were kind of in charge of that, and that's why that became known as the Marshall Plan. Eisenhower basically put Marshall in charge of it, and now in 1951 and 2, Joe McCarthy is going after Marshall, saying that he's purposefully making us weaker and that he is working for the enemies against America. And of course, this heavily offended Eisenhower. Eisenhower wanted to go against McCarthy, but all of the Wisconsin politicians said, you will lose the state of Wisconsin if you go against McCarthy. Eisenhower had a paragraph in a speech he was going to give in Milwaukee, and Milwaukee is basically the alma mater of Joe McCarthy. And all these guys talked him out of it. So he took the paragraph out and he said, okay, are we going to win an election or are we not? So I'll take the fucking paragraph out. That's Dwight Eisenhower. That's very similar to, say, somebody who's pretty powerful in the Republican Party being afraid to go against Trump right now. So this has happened in the past. I would like to point out also that the way Joe McCarthy is looked upon now from a historical standpoint is that he was a real piece of crap. He was a dumb, disheveled drunk who realized that if he told outrageous enough lies, he got more attention. For a while, he was the darling of the Republican Party. What does that sound like? Has that ever happened since? He got shunned within a couple of years, but it did take a couple of years. There were a few years where he was the darling of the Republican Party, the conservatives. I think that in the future, that's how Trump's going to be looked at. That's how Ted Cruz is going to be looked at. What we're dealing with now, of course, that we've been hearing about, the Oath Keepers. There was a thing called Operation Dropbox, put on by Oath Keepers affiliated group called Lions of Liberty. What they were doing was trying to train people on how to go watch the polls. And right now we're hearing about these armed guys with masks sitting in their truck by ballot drop-off boxes. They're trying to intimidate voters. The American Project, started by former Overstock.com CEO Patrick Byrne and Michael Flynn. They had the December 20th meeting with Trump, trying to talk him into using the military to overthrow the government. And that's what Trump was trying to do on January 6th. It didn't work because the military refused to do it. We were saved by just a couple guys in the military. The Election Integrity Network trained 20,000 on election law. Daniel Schultz, he was a former Tea Party activist. He has a thing called precinct strategy, where he's trying to get people to join in their local precincts, basically infiltrate. This is a local Minnesota story that is going national. ABC News has a story on it today. The husband of a GOP nominee for Minnesota's top election post was heard on a recording calling for off-duty officers to form a SWAT team to police poll workers. That is Kim Crackpot's husband. She's running for the Secretary of State here in Minnesota. Kim Crockett is her name. And she's crazy. And her husband, I guess, is crazy or crazier as well. Election workers are being threatened. In August, there were 1,000 reviewed harassing incidences. 100 were submitted for federal investigations. That's insane. That was in August. These are some scary things. Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, running for the Senate, was asked yesterday, I believe, will you accept the results of the election on Tuesday? And he said, I can't predict what the Democrats' plan is. I can't predict what the Democrats are going to do. So he's admitting, if I lose, it's going to be because they rigged it. And a lot of Republicans are saying, well, yeah, if I win, I'll go along with it. But if I lose, I won't. They don't say that part in so many words, but they do say in so many words, I'm going to win. And yes, I can accept that. Here's another disturbing story. It is in Minnesota. Curtis Gilbert, he said, a few weeks ago, Catherine Richard and I realized we're both working on the same story. She was seeing it play out in Rochester, Minnesota. I was trying to get a handle on what was happening across the state and the nation, and we decided to team up. So then she writes, last week, Jim Anderson got an email from a Rochester election integrity group. It asked election judges like him to take pictures of poll machines and documents. It had tips on how to tap polling place hotspots to prove voting machines are vulnerable. Alarmed by the email sent by the head of the Olmsted County Election Integrity Group, Anderson forwarded it to Rochester election officials. It ultimately landed with Secretary of State Steve Simon, who says the instructions could very well be not only against the law, but crimes. But even before that email was sent, Rochester law enforcement was already investigating 2 members of Olmsted County election integrity for potential violations of election law. Both served as election judges in the August primary. What's happening this election season in Rochester isn't unusual. There's a widespread effort across the country and in Minnesota by people who doubt the legitimacy of the 2020 elections to recruit and install poll workers who share their beliefs. David Levine with Secure Democracy is a former election official. He says, this is a concerted effort by a significant portion of the American electorate, albeit a minority, to undermine American elections and American democracy more broadly. In fact, the data from the Secretary of State's office shows Republicans have put more effort into recruiting Minnesota election judges than they did in the 2020 election cycle, and way more than the DFL, which is the Democratic Party in Minnesota. So these are the things I was talking about that are the bummer part. We're going to win the election, but then they're going to say that we stole it. And they're ready to do some physical damage to human beings. These are the things that we need to be vigilant on. It does, however, look like Republicans are losing their taste for Trump. Not to mention Trump is losing his mind, literally. We can see that taking place and hear it in interviews. Kellyanne Conway yesterday, or maybe the day before, unwittingly admitted that Trump is toxic to the GOP. She said she's really glad that he didn't announce that he was running before the midterm elections. And of course, she says his constraint is to be admired. What she's really meaning, what she's really thinking, and I think actually as smart as she is, didn't realize that she basically is tipping us off that if Trump had announced that he was running for president, he would be hurting all of the Republicans' chances in this midterm election. She's basically unwittingly admitting that Trump is toxic to the Republican Party. We got to be vigilant with the craziness that Republicans are trying to do. They've done it before with Joe McCarthy in the 1950s, and look how we look upon Joe McCarthy now. Look how Republicans look how everyone looks upon him now. Nobody thinks that he was a patriot or any of the things that they thought he was at the time. So be hopeful, be vigilant, vote. I know that you're going to vote. Do. It's been fun talking to you. This is Todd Mikkelson with A Satellite View. Hope to see you soon.
You've been listening to A Satellite View with Todd Mikkelson. Go to toddmikkelson.com for links and more information.